When my daughter Celeste died, she left me nothing but a single plane ticket to a village I'd never heard of in rural France. I went, thinking it was her final wish. What I discovered in that stone cottage changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and what I did next tore it apart forever. I'm glad you're here with me today. Stay until the very end because this story takes turns you won't believe, and please comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far Celeste's story reaches. I never imagined I'd be standing at my daughter's funeral at 73 years old. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. It goes against the natural order of things, against everything we believe about how life should unfold. But there I was on that bitter February morning, watching them lower Celeste's casket into the frozen ground at Riverside Memorial Cemetery while my son Dominic stood beside me, dry-eyed and checking his phone every few minutes like he had somewhere more important to be. The wind cut through my black wool coat, the same one I'd worn to my husband's funeral 8 years ago. I pulled it tighter around myself, but the cold I felt wasn't coming from the weather. It was the cold of profound loss, the kind that settles into your bones and never quite leaves. Celeste had been only 48 when the cancer took her. Pancreatic cancer, one of the cruelest varieties, they told me. 6 brutal months from diagnosis to the end. 6 months of watching my vibrant, intelligent, beautiful daughter waste away despite every treatment, every prayer, every desperate hope we clung to. I'd spent every single day at her bedside in those final weeks, holding her hand in the sterile hospital room, reading to her from the books she loved, playing the classical music she'd always adored, trying to make sense of a world that would take someone so young, so full of life, so needed by those who loved her. Celeste had been an art curator at the Whitmore Museum downtown. She'd traveled the world, spoken 4 languages, had friends on every continent. She'd lived more fully in her 48 years than most people do in twice that time. And now she was gone, and I was left standing in a cemetery wondering how I was supposed to continue existing in a world without her light in it. The priest finished his final prayers. People began to disperse, murmuring condolences that all blurred together into meaningless noise. I stood there, frozen, unable to make my feet move away from this place where I was leaving my daughter behind. Mom. Dominic's hand was on my elbow, guiding me firmly toward the waiting cars. We need to go. People are expecting us at the house. I let him lead me, numb and hollow. The ride to Dominic's house passed in a blur of bare trees and gray sky. The reception. The funeral reception was held at Dominic's sprawling home in Thornfield Heights, one of those gated communities where every house looked like it had been designed to intimidate rather than welcome. His house was all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture that looked uncomfortable and probably cost more than my annual income, and not a single family photograph anywhere to be seen. My son had done well for himself. He was a partner at Castellan & Howe, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. At 45, he drove a Tesla, wore suits that cost thousands of dollars, and lived in a house that could fit my entire apartment 3 times over. But standing in his cold, minimalist living room surrounded by his equally cold colleagues, I found myself missing the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were more beautiful than roses. I sat in the corner near the gas fireplace that produced heat but no warmth, exhausted from grief, watching people I barely knew pick at expensive catered food and speak in hushed, uncomfortable tones about what a tragedy it all was. Most of them were Dominic's business associates, people who'd never met Celeste, who were here out of obligation rather than genuine sympathy. Celeste's real friends, the artists, the museum colleagues, the free spirits she'd surrounded herself with, had held their own memorial service 3 days ago. It had been full of tears and laughter and stories that celebrated who she'd really been. This gathering felt like a corporate event that happened to involve a death. Mrs. Hawthorne, can I get you anything? Dominic appeared beside me, his voice carrying that peculiar tone of dutiful concern that lacked any real emotion behind it. His eyes were already scanning the room, checking on his guests, making sure everything was running smoothly. Always the perfect host, even at his sister's funeral reception. I'm fine, sweetheart. Thank you for hosting this. He nodded absently, adjusting his expensive watch. Of course. It's the least I could do. Listen, Vivian is here. She's been helping coordinate everything with the caterers and making sure everything runs smoothly. You should thank her. Vivian. My son's mistress of 3 years, though no one in the family was supposed to acknowledge that openly. His wife Patricia had left him 2 years ago after discovering the affair, taking their 2 teenage daughters with her. The divorce had been ugly and expensive, but Dominic had never bothered to make an honest woman of Vivian. She simply existed in this strange liminal space, not quite family, not quite staff, but ever present in his life and his home. I'd met her perhaps a dozen times, always finding something unsettling about her despite her polished exterior. Or perhaps because of it. Everything about Vivian seemed calculated, from her designer clothes to her practiced smile to the way she'd positioned herself in my son's life. She appeared moments later, as if summoned by the mention of her name, gliding across the room in a black Chanel dress and Louboutin heels. Vivian was 34, platinum blonde, beautiful in that carefully maintained way that required constant professional attention, the kind of beauty that came from expensive salons, personal trainers, and probably a skilled plastic surgeon. She'd been Dominic's executive assistant at the firm before becoming whatever she was now. Mrs. Hawthorne, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy as thick as honey. She sat down next to me without being invited, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. I'm so deeply sorry for your loss. Celeste was such a special, unique person. You met her exactly twice, I thought but didn't say. Once at an awkward family dinner 3 years ago, and once when she accompanied Dominic to the hospital during Celeste's final week. Both times she'd seemed uncomfortable, out of place, eager to leave. Instead, I simply nodded. Thank you, Vivian. It's kind of you to help with the arrangements. Of course. Dominic has been absolutely devastated by this loss. He needed support, someone to lean on. She placed a possessive hand on my son's arm as he stood beside us. We both loved Celeste so much. She was an inspiration to us all. The lie hung in the air between us like smoke. Dominic had barely visited his sister during her 6-month illness, always too busy with work, with important meetings, with his demanding schedule. He'd made it to the hospital maybe 5 times, each visit lasting less than an hour, spending most of it on his phone dealing with urgent work matters. Celeste had noticed. In one of her last clear conversations with me, she'd said, Dom was always more interested in making money than making memories. I used to think he'd change, but some people just don't. There had been sadness in her voice, but also acceptance, as if she'd long ago made peace with who her brother had become. But I was too tired, too heartbroken to call out Vivian's pretense now. What would be the point? I just wanted this day to end, to go home to my quiet apartment and cry in private without having to maintain a brave face for people who didn't really care. The lawyer's arrival. The atmosphere shifted when Gerald Pemberton arrived about an hour into the reception. He was Celeste's attorney, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd called me that morning to say he needed to see me privately regarding Celeste's estate, but I'd been too overwhelmed to ask questions. Dominic spotted him immediately and led us to his home office, a room of dark wood and leather furniture that looked like it belonged to someone twice his age. Vivian trailed behind uninvited, positioning herself near the doorway as if she had every right to be part of this private family matter. This won't take long, Gerald said gently, opening his leather briefcase with practiced efficiency. Celeste left very specific instructions about her estate, and she was adamant that I execute them precisely according to her wishes. My heart clenched painfully. I didn't want to think about Celeste's belongings, her assets, the physical remnants of a life cut far too short. It felt wrong to be discussing money and property when she'd only been in the ground for an hour. She had some savings, Gerald continued, pulling out several documents. Approximately $80,000 accumulated over the years. She's designated those funds to be divided among several charities she supported throughout her life, cancer research, arts education programs, and an organization that helps underprivileged children access museum programming. I felt tears well up. Even in death, Celeste was trying to make the world better, to give opportunities to others. Her apartment contents are to be distributed among specific friends. She left very detailed lists of who should receive what. Her art collection, which is quite valuable, goes to the Whitmore Museum with instructions that pieces be sold to fund their education programs. Dominic shifted impatiently in his expensive leather chair, his jaw tight. And? Gerald looked at him over his glasses, his expression unreadable. And for her mother, she left this. He pulled out a simple cream-colored envelope and handed it to me with both hands, as if it were something precious. My hands trembled as I took it, noticing my name written on the front in Celeste's distinctive handwriting, the elegant script she'd learned during a calligraphy class in college and used for special occasions. I opened it carefully, as if it might break, and found 2 items inside. The first was a plain ticket, not a printout, but an actual paper ticket from Air France. Paris to a place called Belmont-sur-Colline, a small town I'd never heard of, dated for exactly 1 week from today. The second was a handwritten note on Celeste's personal stationery, the cream paper with the watercolor lavender border she'd always loved. Dearest Mom. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I had to leave you. But please, I'm begging you, take this journey. Go to 14 Rue de Cerisiers in Belmont-sur-Colline. The key will be waiting for you at the café across the street. Ask for Madame Rousseau and tell her Celeste sent you. Everything you need to know is waiting there in that house. Everything I couldn't tell you while I was alive because I had to be certain first, because I had to protect you until I had proof. I know this seems strange and mysterious, but trust me one last time, Mom. You raised me to seek truth, to stand up for what's right, to never let injustice go unchallenged. Now I need you to do that one more time, for both of us. The truth is in Belmont-sur-Colline. Please find it. I love you forever and always, Celeste. I read the note 3 times, my hands shaking more with each reading. What truth? What was she talking about? What couldn't she tell me while she was alive? That's it? Dominic's voice cut through my confusion like a knife, sharp with disbelief and poorly concealed anger. A plane ticket to some random French village? That's what she left for Mom? That's what she specifically designated, yes, Gerald confirmed calmly. This is ridiculous. Dominic stood abruptly, beginning to pace the room like a caged animal. What about her savings? The money? The art collection? Those are worth a small fortune. I've seen her apartment. She had pieces from emerging artists that are becoming very valuable. As I explained, Mr. Hawthorne, the savings go to charity, and the art goes to the museum. Those were Celeste's explicit, legally binding wishes, documented in her will, which was properly witnessed and notarized. But family should come first. I'm her brother, for God's sake. Mom is her mother. We should inherit her assets, not some random charities. Dominic. I said his name quietly, but something in my tone made him stop pacing. Your sister made her choices. We have to respect them. Respect them? Mom, she was dying, she was on pain medication. She clearly wasn't thinking straight. Any lawyer could challenge this. Don't, I said more firmly, feeling anger cut through my grief. Don't you dare suggest your sister wasn't of sound mind when she made these decisions. Celeste was sharper than both of us right up until the end. Gerald cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Hawthorne is correct. I met with Celeste multiple times over several months before her death. She was absolutely clear-minded, very specific about her intentions, and very determined that her wishes be carried out exactly as written. There are no grounds to challenge this will. I stared at the plane ticket, at my daughter's handwriting, feeling tears stream down my face. Even in death, Celeste was trying to tell me something, to show me something important enough that she'd use her final weeks to plan this mysterious journey. Mom, you're not seriously considering this, Dominic said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when he thought someone was being irrational. You're 73 years old. You can't just fly to France alone. What if something happens? What if you get sick? What if you fall and break a hip? What if? Your mother is perfectly capable of international travel, Gerald interjected gently but firmly. And Celeste seemed to think this journey was critically important. She arranged everything, the ticket is paid for, she's left instructions, She's clearly put thought into making this as easy as possible. Easy? Dominic laughed, but there was no humor in it. Flying across the Atlantic alone at her age? Navigating a foreign country where she doesn't speak the language? Finding some mysterious house in a village that probably doesn't even have an Uber? This isn't easy, it's dangerous and irresponsible. I speak enough French to get by, I said quietly. Your father and I spent a month in France on our 25th anniversary. I'm not completely helpless, Dominic. Vivian's voice cut in from her position near the door, sweet as poisoned honey. Dominic is right though, Mrs. Hawthorne. At your age, international travel can be risky. You could get disoriented, confused. What if you get lost? What if someone takes advantage of you? Paris has pickpockets, and small French villages aren't always safe for elderly tourists traveling alone. Something in her tone made me look up sharply. There was an edge beneath the sweetness, a calculation I'd sensed before but never quite acknowledged. The way she said elderly felt deliberately condescending, infantilizing. Maybe it would be better if you just stayed here, Vivian continued, moving further into the room uninvited. With family. Where people can take care of you and keep you safe. Celeste wouldn't want you putting yourself at risk for some sentimental wild goose chase. The presumption of her speaking for my dead daughter, of inserting herself into this family matter, sent a flash of anger through my grief. I'm going, I heard myself say, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. Celeste left me this ticket for a reason. She wrote that note asking me to trust her one last time, and I'm going to honor that request. Dominic's face flushed red with anger, a vein pulsing at his temple the way it always did when he didn't get his way. You're being foolish and sentimental. Chasing after some cryptic message instead of being practical. What do you think you're going to find there? Some hidden treasure? A secret inheritance? I don't know what I'll find, I admitted. But your sister used her dying days to arrange this journey. That means it mattered to her, and that's enough for me. Fine. Dominic's voice was cold now, all pretense of concern dropped. Waste your time and money on hotels and transportation. But don't expect me to come rescue you when you realize this was a mistake. Don't call me when you're lost and confused and need help getting home. I won't, I said quietly, feeling something fundamental shift between us. In this moment, I saw my son clearly, not the child I'd raised, but the man he'd become. Someone who measured everything in terms of money and inconvenience, who couldn't understand doing something simply because it was what someone you loved had asked of you. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Vivian lingered for a moment, her blue eyes studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between pity and satisfaction, with an undertone of what might have been fear. I hope you find whatever Celeste wanted you to see, Mrs. Hawthorne, she said softly. Sometimes the truth is hard to accept, but I suppose she thought you needed to know. She paused at the door. Just, be careful. Not everything in the past is meant to be dug up. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with Gerald and the strange, ominous weight of her words. The hidden truth. Gerald waited until he was certain we were alone, then leaned forward with an expression of grave concern. Mrs. Hawthorne, Margot, I should tell you something. Celeste came to see me 3 weeks before she died, when she was already very weak. She could barely walk into my office, but she insisted on meeting in person. My throat tightened. What did she say? She made me promise not to reveal the contents of her bequest or the purpose of your trip until after the funeral. She was very specific about the timing. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She said you needed to see something with your own eyes, that simply telling you wouldn't be enough. That you'd never believe it unless you discovered it yourself. See what? My voice was barely a whisper. She didn't tell me the specifics. But Margot. He removed his glasses and cleaned them, a gesture I recognized as nervousness. She was frightened. I'd been practicing law for 35 years, and I've seen many people prepare their final affairs. But Celeste was different. She wasn't just sad or resigned, she was afraid, and she was angry. She kept saying that someone had to know the truth, that it couldn't stay hidden after she was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Truth about what? She wouldn't say. She just kept repeating that everything you needed would be in the house in Belmont-sur-Colline. She said she'd left documentation, evidence of something. And she said. He put his glasses back on and looked at me intently. She said, make sure Mom goes alone. Make sure Dominic doesn't follow her or try to stop her. This has to be her discovery, her decision about what to do with the truth. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to set down the plane ticket before I dropped it. I don't understand. What could Celeste have discovered that would make her so afraid? What truth could be so important that she'd use her dying days to arrange this elaborate trip? I don't know, Gerald admitted. But I've prepared a file for you. He pulled out a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. This contains additional information, the deed to the property at 14 Rue de Cerisiers, which Celeste purchased 8 months ago under a holding company. Instructions for accessing the house. Contact information for several people in Belmont-sur-Colline who can help you if needed. And this. He handed me a separate, smaller envelope, sealed with wax. Celeste's seal, the one she used for important documents, a small C pressed into deep blue wax. She told me to give you this after the funeral, but to tell you not to open it until you're on the plane. She said you'd understand why once you read it. I took the envelope with trembling hands, feeling the weight of secrets I couldn't yet comprehend. One more thing, Gerald said quietly. Celeste asked me to tell you that she loves you, that she's sorry for the burden she's placing on you, but that you're the only person she could trust with this. She said, Mom always taught me to do what's right, even when it's hard. Now I need her to do the same. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched my daughter's final letters to my chest. Whatever Celeste had discovered, whatever truth waited for me in a small village in rural France, it had been important enough that she'd spent her last days making sure I would find it. And I would. For Celeste. For whatever justice she'd been seeking. For the truth that had frightened her even as she was dying. I left Dominic's house without saying goodbye, clutching the plane ticket and the sealed letter like lifelines. Behind me, I could hear Vivian's voice, sharp and anxious, and Dominic's angry responses. But I didn't look back. The next 6 days passed in a strange blur of mechanical preparation. I barely ate, barely slept, moving through my small apartment like a ghost as I packed, made arrangements, tried to prepare myself for a journey I didn't understand. Dominic called repeatedly, his messages shifting between anger and condescension. Mom, this is insane. You're 73 years old. What are you trying to prove? You're going to get there and find nothing. Celeste was sick, she wasn't thinking clearly. Fine, be stubborn. But when you need help, don't expect me to drop everything to bail you out. I didn't answer most of his calls. What was there to say? My daughter had asked me to take this journey, and I was going to honor that request. It was that simple and that complicated. 2 days before my departure, Vivian sent a text message, Mrs. Hawthorne, I know you think I'm just Dom's girlfriend who has no right to an opinion, but please reconsider this trip. Some secrets are buried for good reason. What Celeste wanted you to find, it might destroy your family. Is that what she would have wanted? Think carefully before you open doors that can't be closed again. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart racing. How did Vivian know what Celeste wanted me to find? What secrets was she talking about? And why did she sound less concerned about my safety and more worried about what I might discover? I didn't respond to her text. But I did save it, some instinct telling me it might be important later. The night before my flight, I sat in my apartment surrounded by old photo albums, looking at pictures of Celeste throughout her life. Celeste as a baby, with my late husband Paul holding her like she was made of spun glass. Celeste at 8, gap-toothed and grinning, winning first place at her school's science fair. Celeste at 16, all gangly limbs and defiant attitude, but with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. Celeste at 25, graduating from her art history program, her face glowing with pride and potential. And finally, photos from just a few months ago, Celeste gaunt and pale from the cancer, but still managing to smile at the camera. In one of the last pictures I'd taken, she was holding my hand, and there was something in her expression, a mixture of love and sadness and determination that I hadn't understood at the time. Now, looking at that photo, I realized she'd already known. She'd already discovered whatever truth was waiting for me in France, and she'd been trying to prepare herself for leaving me with the burden of it. "I'm coming, sweetheart," I whispered to her image. "I'm going to find whatever you wanted me to see. I'm going to finish what you started." The next morning, I took a taxi to the airport, one small suitcase and my carry-on bag containing Celeste's letters, the house information, and the sealed envelope I still hadn't opened. At the airport, I checked in for my flight, made my way through security, and sat at the gate watching planes take off and land. My phone buzzed constantly, Dominic calling again, Vivian texting warnings, even some of Dominic's colleagues who I barely knew sending messages suggesting I reconsider this impulsive decision. I turned my phone to airplane mode and boarded the flight to Paris. Once we were airborne and the seatbelt sign turned off, I carefully opened the sealed envelope from Celeste. My hands were shaking so badly I almost tore it. Inside was a single sheet of paper in her handwriting. "Mom. By now you're on the plane, and I hope you're not too frightened. I know this all seems mysterious and probably scary, but I promise there's a reason for everything. 8 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about our family. I've spent the time since then investigating, documenting, gathering proof. I couldn't tell you while I was alive because I needed you to be protected, to have plausible deniability if things went wrong. What you're going to find in Belmont-sur-Colline will hurt. It will make you question things you thought you knew. It will make you angry, and sad, and probably make you want to pretend you never saw it. But Mom, you taught me that the truth matters. That integrity matters. That we don't let wrong things continue just because confronting them is uncomfortable. So I'm asking you to be brave one more time. See what I found. Read the documents. Look at the evidence. And then decide what to do with the truth. I know you'll make the right choice. You always do. All my love, Celeste. P.S. Don't trust Dominic. And whatever you do, don't trust Vivian. She's not what she pretends to be." I read the last lines 3 times, my heart pounding. Don't trust Vivian. She's not what she pretends to be. I looked out the airplane window at the clouds below, feeling the weight of mystery and grief and determination settling over me like a cloak. Whatever waited for me in Belmont-sur-Colline, whatever truth Celeste had died protecting, I was going to find it. And then, God help anyone who had hurt my daughter, I was going to do something about it. The plane flew on through the night, carrying me toward answers I couldn't yet imagine and a truth that would change everything. The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport at 6:47 in the morning, local time. I'd barely slept during the overnight flight, kept awake by turbulence, the uncomfortable seat, and the relentless churning of my thoughts. Celeste's letter had raised more questions than it answered, and the warning about Vivian echoed in my mind like an alarm I couldn't silence. What had my daughter discovered? What had frightened her so badly in her final months? And why had she felt the need to protect me with plausible deniability until after her death? The airport was a maze of signs in French and English, crowds of travelers moving with purposeful efficiency while I stood disoriented and jet-lagged, clutching my small suitcase and trying to remember the connection instructions Gerald had included in the folder. I needed to catch a regional train to Lyon, then a smaller local train to Belmont-sur-Colline. The entire journey would take approximately 6 hours. My phone buzzed as soon as I turned off airplane mode. 12 missed calls from Dominic, 6 text messages, and 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to them. Instead, I pulled up the photo of Gerald's instructions and made my way toward the train station, following the overhead signs and the flow of passengers who seemed to know where they were going. The RR train into Paris proper was crowded with commuters, well-dressed businesspeople checking their phones, students with backpacks, tourists with rolling suitcases. I found a seat near the window and watched the outskirts of Paris slide past, industrial areas giving way to residential neighborhoods, then finally the beautiful architecture of the city itself. At Gare de Lyon, I had a 2-hour layover before my train to Lyon departed. I found a small cafe in the station and ordered coffee and a croissant, my first food in nearly 24 hours. The coffee was strong and bitter, the croissant buttery and flaky, and despite my exhaustion and anxiety, I found myself feeling something unexpected, a tiny spark of, not happiness exactly, but purpose. I was doing what Celeste had asked me to do. I was honoring her final request. And for the first time since her diagnosis 6 months ago, I felt like I had some control over something, even if I didn't yet understand what that something was. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Vivian. Dominic is very worried about you. Please at least let us know you arrived safely. We care about you, even if you don't believe that right now. The presumption of that, we, irritated me more than it should have. Vivian wasn't family. She had no claim to concern about my well-being, no right to insert herself into this situation. And yet she kept doing it, kept pushing herself into spaces where she didn't belong. I typed back a brief response, I'm fine. In Paris. Will contact Dominic when I'm settled. I didn't mention where I was going next. Something about Celeste's warning, don't trust Vivian, made me cautious about sharing too many details. The journey south. The train to Lyon was comfortable, with large windows that offered stunning views of the French countryside. We passed through small villages with stone churches, endless fields of winter-brown farmland, vineyards bare in the February cold. I watched it all slide past, feeling like I was traveling not just through space but through time, moving towards some revelation that Celeste had carefully orchestrated. I pulled out the manila folder Gerald had given me and began reading through the documents more carefully. The property deed for 14 Rue de Cerisiers showed that Celeste had purchased it 8 months ago, right around the time she must have made her discovery, whatever it was. She'd paid 185,000 euros for it, which seemed like a substantial sum for a dying woman to spend on a property in a village she'd never mentioned visiting. There was a letter from a local real estate agent, Madame Claudette Bissett, who had handled the purchase. She wrote in careful English that she hoped Madame Hawthorne would find the property satisfactory and that she remained available for any questions or assistance. Her phone number was included. Another document showed utility bills. Celeste had kept the electricity and water running for the past 8 months, even though the property appeared to have remained vacant. Why? What had she been planning to do with this house? There were also contact details for several local people, Madame Sophie Rousseau at Café de la Place, who apparently had the house key. Monsieur Antoine Leroux, described as a local historian and family friend. And a Dr. Emily Moreau in the neighboring town of Chambon, listed simply as important contact if needed. The final item in the folder was a hand-drawn map of Belmont-sur-Colline with several locations marked: the café, the house on Rue de Cerisiers, the town hall, the church, and one location marked with a red X and the words, cemetery, visit second. Visit second. Which implied there was somewhere I should visit first. The house, presumably. At Lyon, I changed to a smaller regional train that was less crowded, more intimate. An elderly French couple sat across from me, speaking in rapid French I could barely follow. When the conductor came through to check tickets, I asked him in my halting French about Belmont-sur-Colline. Ah, oui, he said, smiling. Very beautiful, very quiet. Not many tourists. You have family there? Something like that, I said, not knowing how else to explain. The village is very old, he continued in accented but clear English, apparently taking pity on my poor French. Many of the buildings are from the 17th century. The church is even older. Very peaceful place. Good for, how do you say, reflection. Reflection. Yes, I suppose that was what I was here for, though I suspected it would be a painful kind of reflection. The train climbed into more hilly terrain as we traveled south. The landscape became more dramatic, rolling hills covered in bare trees, rocky outcroppings, occasional glimpses of rivers. It was beautiful in a stark, winter way, but also somehow melancholy, matching my mood. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to the conductor gently touching my shoulder. Madam, we arrive at Belmont-sur-Colline in 5 minutes. Next stop. I sat up, disoriented and stiff from the awkward sleeping position. Through the window, I could see we were passing through a small valley with a river running through it. Stone houses with red tile roofs clustered on the hillside, and at the top of the hill, I could see a church steeple rising above the other buildings. The train slowed and pulled into a tiny station, really just a covered platform with a small waiting room. There were only 3 other people getting off here, a young woman with a baby, an older man in work clothes, and me. I stepped onto the platform with my suitcase, and the train pulled away, leaving me standing in the quiet afternoon. It was cold, but not as bitter as it had been at home. The air smelled of wood smoke and something else, lavender, maybe, though it was the wrong season for it. The station was at the edge of the village. A narrow road led uphill toward the cluster of stone buildings I'd seen from the train. There was no taxi stand, no Uber drivers waiting, no obvious way to get into the village proper except to walk. I took a deep breath, grasped the handle of my rolling suitcase, and started walking. First impressions of the village. Belmont-sur-Colline was exactly as the conductor had described, quiet, old, peaceful. The narrow street wound upward between stone houses with weathered shutters and small gardens still brown from winter. I passed a boulangerie with warm light spilling from its windows, a small épicerie with produce displayed outside, a pharmacy with a green cross sign. A few people were out, an elderly man walking a small dog, 2 women chatting outside the bakery, a teenager on a scooter who whizzed past me with barely a glance. They all looked at me with mild curiosity, the way small-town people everywhere regard strangers, but no one seemed alarmed or unwelcoming. At the top of the hill, the street opened into a small square, what the French called a place. There was the church I'd seen from the train, its stone walls dark with age. Across from it was a modest town hall with a French flag hanging limp in the still air. And tucked into one corner of the square was a café with small tables outside despite the cold weather and a sign reading, Café de la Place. Madame Rousseau. The woman who had my key. I dragged my suitcase across the cobblestones, feeling every one of my 73 years in my aching legs and back. The journey had taken nearly 12 hours from my apartment to this moment, and I was exhausted, hungry, and desperately in need of a bathroom. The café was warm inside, smelling of coffee and something savory cooking in the back. There were only a few customers, 2 men playing chess at a corner table, an elderly woman reading a newspaper, a younger man working on a laptop. Behind the bar stood a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wiping down the espresso machine. She looked up as I entered, and her expression immediately changed from neutral to something more knowing, almost expecting. "Madame Hawthorne?" she asked in accented English. I nodded, surprised. "Yes. Are you Madame Rousseau?" "Sophie Rousseau," she confirmed, coming around the bar. "I have been expecting you. Celeste said you would come, though she was not sure exactly when." Her eyes filled with sympathy. "I am so very sorry for your loss. Your daughter was a remarkable woman." The fact that this stranger in a French village had known my daughter well enough to call her remarkable made my throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you. Did you know Celeste well?" "She came here 3 times over the past 8 months. Always she stayed at the house on Rue de Cerisiers, always she spent hours in the archives at the town hall and at the church. She was very determined, very focused on her research." Sophie gestured to a table near the window. "Please, sit. You must be exhausted from traveling. Let me bring you coffee, something to eat. Then we talk, yes?" I sank gratefully into the chair, my legs trembling from exhaustion. Sophie brought me a large café au lait and a croque-monsieur, a ham and cheese sandwich, grilled until golden. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I took the first bite. While I ate, Sophie sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. "Celeste told me that if you came, you would have many questions. She said to answer what I could, but that most of your answers would be at the house." "What was she researching?" I asked. "What was she looking for here?" Sophie's expression became careful, guarded. "That is not for me to say, madam. But I can tell you that what she found, it troubled her very much. She was sad, and also angry. She said that truth buried too long becomes poison, that someone must bring it into the light. Truth about what? About the past. About families. About choices made long ago that still cause pain today. Sophie reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an old-fashioned iron key. This opens the house on Rue de Cerisiers. It is number 14, just 3 streets down from here. You cannot miss it. It has blue shutters, and there is a cherry tree in the front garden, bare now in winter but beautiful in spring. I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. Is there anything else I should know? Sophie hesitated, then leaned forward. Celeste asked me to tell you to be brave. She said that what you will find may change how you see your family, may change how you see your own past. But she said that you are strong enough to handle the truth, and that you will know what must be done with it. Did she seem frightened? The last letter she wrote me, she seemed afraid. Yes, Sophie admitted. Especially in the last visit, 6 weeks before she died. She came here very sick, very weak, but also very urgent. She said she was running out of time, that she had to make sure everything was ready for you. She spent 2 days arranging documents, organizing the house, writing letters. And yes, she was afraid. Not for herself, I think by then she had accepted that she was dying. But afraid for you, perhaps. Afraid of what the truth might cost. A chill ran through me despite the warm cafe. Cost in what way? That, madam, you must discover for yourself. I have promised Celeste to give you the key and to answer basic questions, but the rest, it must be your own discovery, your own decision. She stood up. The house is ready for you. There is food in the kitchen. I stocked it yesterday, as Celeste instructed me to do when you arrived. There is firewood for the fireplace, clean linens on the bed. Everything you need. Thank you, I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes again. Thank you for helping my daughter, and for helping me now. Sophie's expression softened. Celeste was easy to help. She had a good heart, a strong sense of justice. I think you must be the same, or she would not have trusted you with this task. She paused. One more thing. If you need anything while you are here, help, advice, just someone to talk to, you come to me, yes? This cafe is open every day from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. You are not alone here, even though you may feel that way. The house on Rue de Cerisiers. I found number 14 easily, just as Sophie had described. It was a narrow stone house 3 stories tall, with faded blue shutters and a small walled garden in front where a gnarled cherry tree stood bare against the gray sky. The house was wedged between similar buildings, part of a row of ancient structures that looked like they'd been standing for centuries. The iron key turned smoothly in the lock, and the heavy wooden door swung open with a creak. I stepped inside, dragging my suitcase, and stopped in the small entryway, just breathing, trying to understand why Celeste had bought this house, what she had intended it for. The interior was simple but charming. The ground floor was one long room, a sitting area with a stone fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area at the other. A narrow staircase led to the upper floors. The walls were exposed stone, the floors were worn terracotta tile, and the few pieces of furniture looked antique but functional. But it was what covered nearly every surface that made me catch my breath. Documents. Papers. Photographs. File folders. Boxes of materials carefully labeled and organized. The dining table was covered with neat stacks of papers. The sideboard held several boxes marked with dates. And on every wall, Celeste had created what looked like an investigation board, photographs pinned up, connected with red string, with notes written in her distinctive handwriting. I dropped my suitcase and moved closer to the nearest wall, my heart pounding. The photographs were old, some of them looked like they were from the 1940s or 1950s, black and white images of people in period clothing. There were pictures of a large estate house, formal gardens, people in military uniforms. Mixed in were more recent photographs, color prints that looked like they'd been taken in the past few years. One photograph in particular caught my eye. It was recent, taken with a digital camera, showing a woman in her 60s or 70s standing in front of the same estate house from the older photographs. She was elegantly dressed, blonde hair styled perfectly, and she was smiling at the camera. My breath stopped. I knew that face. Younger, less refined, but unmistakable. It was Vivian. No, not Vivian exactly. But someone who looked so much like her that they had to be related. Mother and daughter? Aunt and niece? With trembling hands, I unpinned the photograph and turned it over. On the back, in Celeste's handwriting, Vivian Laurent Beaumont, née Marchand, photographed at the Beaumont estate, 2019. Current age approximately 68. I stared at the words, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Vivian Laurent Beaumont. Current age approximately 68. But that was impossible. The Vivian I knew, the woman who'd been Dominic's mistress for 3 years, was 34 years old. She was young, beautiful, decades younger than this woman in the photograph. Unless the Vivian I knew had been lying about everything. I sank into the nearest chair, still holding the photograph, my thoughts racing. If this was true, if the woman Dominic thought was his young girlfriend was actually in her late 60s, then what else had been a lie? And why? What could possibly be the purpose of such an elaborate deception? I looked around at the walls of photographs and documents, at the months of research Celeste had conducted, and I understood with growing horror that I was looking at evidence of something far more complex and sinister than I had imagined. This wasn't just about a family secret or a hidden truth. This was about a con. A fraud. A carefully planned deception that had somehow ensnared my son and my family. And my daughter had spent her final months trying to expose it. The first documents. I forced myself to stand, to approach the table where Celeste had organized her research. There was a large envelope marked, "Start here, Moem," in her handwriting. Inside were several documents, arranged in careful order, with post-it notes containing Celeste's explanations. The first was a birth certificate from France, dated 1956. It showed the birth of Vivian Marcel Marchand to parents François and Marguerite Marchand in Lyon, France. If this was the same person, she would be 68 or 69 years old now, not 34. The second document was a marriage certificate from 1982, showing the marriage of Vivian Marchand to Laurent Beaumont in Paris. Celeste had attached a note, first husband, died 2003 of heart attack. Left substantial estate. The third document was another marriage certificate from 2007, showing the marriage of Vivian Beaumont to Richard Caldwell in London. Another note from Celeste, second husband, wealthy businessman, died 2015 in suspicious car accident. Left entire fortune to Vivian. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. The fourth document was a death certificate for Richard Caldwell, dated March 2015. Cause of death, single vehicle accident, lost control on mountain road. But Celeste had circled something in the police report attached to it. Investigation closed despite witness reports of another vehicle leaving scene. Insufficient evidence to pursue vehicular homicide. The fifth document was a series of photographs showing Vivian Beaumont at various ages, in her 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. The progression was clear. This was the same woman throughout, aging naturally over decades. And the woman in her 60s looked exactly like the Vivian who was currently living with my son. The final document in the "Start Here" pile was a letter from Celeste, dated 2 weeks before her death. Mom. If you're reading this, you've seen the birth certificates and marriage records. You've seen the photographs showing Vivian's real age. I know it seems impossible, but I've spent 8 months verifying every detail. I've interviewed people who knew her in France, found witnesses to her marriages, tracked down former associates. It's all real. The woman calling herself Vivian and pretending to be 34 is actually Vivian Laurent Marchand Beaumont Caldwell, age 68. She has been using extensive plastic surgery, makeup, and careful presentation to pass as a woman 30 years younger than her real age. But Mom, that's just the surface. The age deception is just the beginning. She's done this before. Twice that I can document, possibly more times I haven't uncovered yet. She finds wealthy men, usually middle-aged, successful, somewhat vulnerable. She makes them fall in love with her. She positions herself in their lives as the perfect partner. And then, within a few years, they die under suspicious circumstances and she inherits everything. Laurent Beaumont, her first husband, heart attack at 52, even though he had no history of heart disease. Left her his estate worth €3 million. Richard Caldwell, her second husband, car accident at 58, even though he was an experienced driver on a road he traveled regularly. Left her his entire fortune, approximately £8 million. And now she's with Dominic. Mom, I'm scared. I'm scared for Dom, even though he's been a terrible brother and I'm angry with him. I'm scared because I see the pattern so clearly, and I know what happens next. She's been with him for 3 years. That's the timeline. She usually strikes around the 3 to 4 year mark, once she's completely integrated into their lives, once she's secured access to their finances, once she's isolated them from friends and family who might question things. Dominic is 45, successful, wealthy, and thanks to the distance Vivian has created, he's now fairly isolated from both of us. He's exactly her type of target. I tried to warn him, Mom. 6 months ago, before I got too sick, I told him what I'd found. I showed him the evidence. He didn't believe me. He said I was jealous of his happiness, that I was making up conspiracy theories, that I was trying to destroy his relationship because I was miserable and alone. It was the last real conversation we ever had. He stopped visiting me after that. Stopped calling. Vivian convinced him that I was toxic, that I was trying to ruin his life, that he needed to distance himself from me for his own well-being. That's when I knew I had to do this differently. I had to leave the evidence for you, had to make sure someone else would know the truth after I was gone. Because Mom, I think Vivian knows I discovered her secret. I think that's why she worked so hard to isolate Dominic from me, to make sure he wouldn't believe anything I said. And I think she's going to try to kill him soon. Maybe within the next year or two. An accident, probably. Something that looks natural or tragic but not suspicious. That's her pattern. That's what she does. You have to stop her, Mom. You have to protect Dom, even if he doesn't want to be protected, even if he hates you for it. Because he's still your son, and he's still my brother, and I can't let him die the way her other victims died. All the evidence is here in this house. I've organized it by category: birth records, marriage records, death certificates, financial documents, witness interviews, everything. I've also included a file on how to contact the police, both here in France and back home, and a lawyer who specializes in this kind of case. I'm sorry to leave you with this burden. I'm sorry I couldn't finish it myself. But I trust you to do what's right, to be brave enough to face the truth and strong enough to act on it. Save Dominic, Mom. Stop Vivian before she kills again. I love you, Celeste. I sat at the table, Celeste's letter in my trembling hands, and finally understood the magnitude of what my daughter had discovered. Vivian wasn't just a mistress, wasn't just a liar about her age. She was a serial killer who preyed on wealthy men. And my son was her next target. I looked around at the walls covered with evidence, at the months of careful research Celeste had conducted even as she was dying, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief and exhaustion were still there, but underneath them was something harder, colder, more determined. My daughter had spent her final days trying to protect her brother, trying to stop a murderer, trying to make sure the truth wouldn't die with her. Now it was my responsibility to finish what she'd started. I stood up, walked to the fireplace, and began to build a fire in the gathering darkness. It would be a long night. I had months of evidence to review, a case to understand, a plan to formulate. But first, I needed to call Dominic. I needed to hear his voice and know he was still alive. And I needed to be very, very careful about what I said, because if Vivian suspected that I knew the truth, she might accelerate her timeline. My son's life depended on me playing this exactly right. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed Dominic's number, praying I wasn't already too late. My hands shook as I stared at Dominic's number on my phone screen. The fire crackled in the fireplace behind me, casting dancing shadows across the walls covered with evidence of Vivian's crimes. Outside, darkness had fallen completely over Belmont-sur-Colline, and the old house creaked in the wind like it was sharing secrets. I couldn't just call and blurt out the truth. Celeste's letter had made that clear. Dominic hadn't believed her when she tried to warn him, had cut her off completely in her final months because Vivian had convinced him his sister was jealous and toxic. If I came at him with accusations about his girlfriend being a 68-year-old serial killer, he'd dismiss me the same way, hang up, and possibly warn Vivian that I was making trouble. And if Vivian knew I'd discovered her secret, she might panic. Might accelerate whatever plan she had for Dominic. Might make her move before I could stop her. No, I had to be smart about this. Strategic. I had to play the role of the concerned but confused elderly mother, worried about her son but not threatening to his relationship. I had to buy time to gather allies, build an ironclad case, and find a way to protect Dominic whether he wanted protection or not. I took a deep breath and pressed the call button. He answered on the third ring, his voice sharp with irritation. Mom. It's almost midnight here. Is everything okay? I'm sorry, sweetheart. I forgot about the time difference. I just wanted to let you know I arrived safely. A pause. You actually went through with this insane trip. I did. I'm in Belmont-sur-Colline. It's a beautiful village, very peaceful. The house Celeste bought is lovely. So there really was a house. He sounded surprised. I thought maybe this whole thing was some kind of mistake, that you'd get there and find out it was all a misunderstanding. No, it's real. Celeste bought it 8 months ago. I'm staying here now. I forced myself to sound calm, conversational, like a mother updating her son on her travel plans rather than a woman who just discovered his girlfriend was a murderer. Well, I'm glad you're safe, I guess. When are you coming home? I'm not sure yet. There are some things here I need to go through. Celeste left quite a bit of research. Papers and photographs. It's going to take me some time to sort through it all. Another pause, longer this time. When Dominic spoke again, his tone had shifted, become more guarded. What kind of research? I'm not entirely sure yet. Historical things, family things. You know how Celeste was always interested in genealogy and family history. The lie came surprisingly easily. I think she was trying to trace our family roots in France. Did you know our great-grandmother was French? I'd forgotten, but apparently Celeste was trying to document that connection. I could hear the relief in his exhale. That sounds like Celeste. Always digging into the past. A softer note entered his voice, genuine grief breaking through his usual emotional armor. I wish I'd spent more time with her at the end. I was so busy with work, and then after our argument. She understood, sweetheart. She knew you loved her. The words hurt to say, knowing they weren't entirely true, but I needed to keep Dominic talking, keep him feeling safe with me. How are you doing? Are you taking care of yourself? I'm okay. Vivian's been amazing, really supportive. She's been helping me work through everything, making sure I eat, making sure I don't just bury myself in work to avoid dealing with the grief. Of course she has, I thought. Keeping close, maintaining control, making herself indispensable. That was part of the pattern Celeste had documented. Vivian always positioned herself as the perfect partner, the devoted companion, right up until the moment she killed her victim. I'm glad you have support, I managed to say. Is Vivian there with you now? No, she went to visit her mother for a few days. She'll be back tomorrow night. Her mother. The lie was so casual, so easily delivered. According to Celeste's research, Vivian's mother had died in 1998. But Dominic didn't know that because he'd never actually met any of Vivian's supposed family. She'd told him they were estranged, that it was too painful to talk about, that she preferred to focus on building a new family with him rather than dwelling on the past. Classic isolation technique. Cut the victim off from your past so they can't verify anything. Make yourself mysterious and tragic so they don't ask too many questions. Control all the information. Well, give her my regards, I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. I will. Look, Mom, I'm glad you're safe, but I really need to get some sleep. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Of course. I love you, Dominic. A brief hesitation. Love you too, Mom. Be careful over there, okay? And maybe think about coming home soon. That house is probably drafty and old, and you're not getting any younger. After we hung up, I sat by the fire for a long time, just staring into the flames. My son was alive. For now. But for how much longer? How much time did I have before Vivian made her move? I needed help. I needed allies. And I needed to understand every detail of what Celeste had discovered so I could build a case strong enough that even Dominic couldn't deny it. The evidence. I spent the entire night going through Celeste's research, drinking cup after cup of strong coffee, feeding the fire, reading by lamplight as the full horror of Vivian's crimes became clear. My daughter had been thorough. Obsessively, remarkably thorough. She'd started with basic public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates. Then she'd gone deeper, finding police reports, autopsy records, insurance claims, financial transactions. She'd traveled to France twice before she got too sick, interviewing people who had known Vivian over the years, photographing locations, gathering physical evidence. The file on Laurent Beaumont, Vivian's first husband, was heartbreaking. He'd been a successful vineyard owner in Burgundy, 52 years old, in good health according to his doctor's records. He'd married Vivian when he was 45 and she was 38, after his first wife had died of breast cancer. Everyone had been happy that Laurent had found love again. Then, 3 years into the marriage, he died suddenly of a massive heart attack. The autopsy showed high levels of digitalis in his system, a heart medication that, in high doses, can cause fatal cardiac arrest. But Laurent hadn't been taking digitalis. His doctor confirmed he'd never prescribed it. The initial investigation had been closed when Vivian explained that Laurent had been taking his late wife's old medications, that he'd been depressed and perhaps suicidal. The story was plausible enough, sad enough, that the police hadn't pushed further. Vivian had inherited everything, the vineyard, the house, approximately 3 million euros in assets. She'd sold it all within a year and moved to London. Richard Caldwell's file was even more damning. He'd been a wealthy investment banker, 58 years old, who'd met Vivian at a charity gala in 2011. She'd been 55 then, but according to witnesses Celeste had interviewed, she'd been presenting herself as being in her early 40s. Extensive plastic surgery, expert makeup, carefully chosen clothing, strategic lighting, she'd managed the deception successfully. Richard had fallen hard for her. They'd married within 18 months. And then, 3.5 years later, his car had gone off a cliff on a Scottish road he'd driven 100 times before. The brake lines had been worn, the investigation noted, but not suspiciously so. The official conclusion was driver error combined with mechanical failure, tragic but not criminal. But Celeste had found a witness who'd never been interviewed by the police, a local farmer who'd been in his field that evening and had seen 2 cars on that road. He'd seen the second car following close behind Richard's, had seen it pull over after Richard's car went off the cliff, had seen someone get out and look over the edge before driving away quickly. The farmer had reported it to the local police, but his statement had somehow never made it into the official file. Celeste had tracked him down, interviewed him, recorded his testimony. He'd even been able to describe the second car, a dark blue sedan, expensive looking, with a woman driving. Vivian had owned a dark blue Mercedes at the time. She'd inherited Richard's entire fortune, approximately £8 million, plus substantial life insurance. She'd moved back to France, and by all appearances, had retired to a comfortable life on the Côte d'Azur. Until 3 years ago, when she'd somehow erased a decade off her apparent age, created a new identity as a 34-year-old woman, and gotten herself hired as an executive assistant at Castellan & Howe, the firm where my son worked. Celeste had documented all of this in meticulous detail. She'd created timelines, analyzed patterns, identified the common elements in each of Vivian's crimes. She'd even found evidence that Vivian might have been married once before Laurent, to a wealthy older man in Nice in the 1980s who'd also died suddenly, though the records there were incomplete. The most chilling document was a psychological profile Celeste had commissioned from a forensic psychiatrist she'd befriended during her research. The psychiatrist had analyzed all the available information and concluded that Vivian displayed classic characteristics of a psychopath: superficial charm, pathological lying, lack of empathy, grandiose sense of self-worth, and a parasitic lifestyle. The pattern of her crimes suggested careful planning, patience, and absolutely no remorse. The profile concluded, subject is extremely dangerous and likely to continue pattern until caught or physically unable to continue. Emotional connections to victims appear non-existent. Victims are merely resources to be exploited. Subject's intelligence and adaptability make her difficult to catch, as she learns from each crime and adjusts her methods accordingly. As dawn broke over Belmont-sur-Colline, I sat surrounded by the evidence of a serial killer's 2-decade career, knowing that my son was her next intended victim, and feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on me. Celeste had done the research. Now I had to finish her work. I had to stop Vivian before she killed Dominic. Building the case. Over the next 3 days, I barely left the house on Rue de Cerisiers. I studied every document, memorized every detail, organized the evidence into a comprehensive case that even the most skeptical investigator couldn't dismiss. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed professional help. People with the authority and resources to investigate an international serial killer, to protect Dominic, to bring Vivian to justice. Celeste had anticipated this. In her files, she'd included contact information for several people who could help. First was Inspector Jean-Claude Moreau of the French National Police, stationed in Lyon. Celeste had already been in contact with him, had shared some of her preliminary findings, had planted the seeds of an investigation. He was expecting me to reach out. Second was Detective Sarah Chen with the International Crimes Division back home. She specialized in cases involving fraud and murder across international borders. Celeste had sent her anonymous tips but had died before she could provide the full evidence. Third was Marcus Goldstein, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse and estate fraud. He'd agreed to help Celeste pro bono because he'd lost his own father to a similar scheme years ago. I started with Inspector Moreau. I called the number Celeste had provided, and after being transferred twice, I finally heard his voice, deep, professional, with a slight accent when he spoke English. Inspector Moreau, my name is Margot Hawthorne. I'm calling about the research my daughter Celeste was conducting before her death. She told me you were aware of her investigation into Vivian Beaumont. There was a pause, then his voice became more alert, focused. Madam Hawthorne. Yes, I have been expecting your call. Please accept my condolences for your loss. Your daughter was a remarkable investigator. The information she provided has been very valuable. Then you believe her? You believe Vivian is responsible for the deaths of her husbands? I believe there are enough concerning patterns to warrant serious investigation. I have been quietly reviewing the cases she brought to my attention. The death of Laurent Beaumont, in particular, has some irregularities that were not properly investigated at the time. Relief flooded through me. Inspector, my son is currently involved with this woman. He thinks she's 34 years old. He has no idea who she really is or what she's done. I'm terrified she's going to kill him. I understand your concern, madam. But I must be honest with you, building a case that will result in prosecution is very difficult. The deaths occurred years ago. Much of the evidence is circumstantial. And Vivian Beaumont is, by all accounts, extremely intelligent and careful. She has successfully avoided suspicion for 2 decades. So what do we do? Just wait for her to kill my son so you'll have fresh evidence? No. His voice was firm. We do what your daughter started. We build an ironclad case. We find the proof that links her to these deaths. And we protect your son in the meantime by making sure she knows she's being watched. How do we do that? First, you need to come to Lyon. Bring all of your daughter's research. I need to see everything, document everything properly. Then we bring in the American authorities. Detective Chen has already been in touch with us. We coordinate an international investigation. That could take months. Maybe years. Dominic doesn't have that kind of time. Which is why we also pursue a more immediate strategy. We make Vivian aware that her cover is blown. We let her know that multiple law enforcement agencies are investigating her. We make it clear that any harm that comes to your son will be immediately attributed to her, that she cannot possibly get away with another murder now that we know who and what she is. Won't that make her dangerous? If she realizes we know, won't she either run or try to kill Dominic immediately? Possibly. Which is why we must move carefully and quickly. We arrange protection for your son, whether he wants it or not. We conduct our confrontation with Vivian in a controlled environment where she cannot act impulsively. And we make sure she understands that her only rational choice is to disappear and leave your son alone. It wasn't the guarantee of justice I wanted. The thought of Vivian simply walking away, free to potentially victimize someone else in the future, made me sick. But it was a strategy that might save Dominic's life, and that had to be the priority. When should I come to Lyon? Tomorrow. I will arrange for a secure location where we can meet. Bring everything. And Madam Hawthorne? Do not contact your son again until we have protection in place. If Vivian suspects that you know the truth, she may act unpredictably. After I hung up, I called Detective Chen and Marcus Goldstein. Both confirmed they would coordinate with Inspector Moreau. Both expressed admiration for Celeste's research and determination to see justice done in her name. The net was closing around Vivian. But would it close fast enough? The trap. Inspector Moreau moved faster than I'd expected. Within 48 hours, he'd assembled a task force, reviewed all of Celeste's evidence, coordinated with international authorities, and developed a plan. The plan was risky but elegant. We would confront Vivian with the evidence, in a controlled setting, with law enforcement present but not immediately visible. We would make it clear that her crimes were known, that continued investigation was underway, and that any harm to Dominic would result in immediate prosecution. We would offer her a choice: disappear from Dominic's life completely, or face criminal investigation in multiple countries for multiple murders. It wasn't perfect justice. But it might save my son's life. The confrontation was set for Friday afternoon at a private room in a hotel in Lyon. Inspector Moreau's team had confirmed that Vivian was in France, supposedly visiting her fictional sick mother. They'd tracked her to a luxury hotel in the city, not visiting any mother, just enjoying a few days of spending Dominic's money on herself. Getting Dominic to France without alerting Vivian was tricky. But Marcus Goldstein provided the solution. He called Dominic claiming to be settling some final estate matters for Celeste and needing his signature on documents in Lyon. It was plausible enough that Dominic agreed to fly over for a quick trip, telling Vivian he'd be back in 48 hours. The morning of the confrontation, I met Dominic at the Lyon airport. He looked tired, stressed, thinner than when I'd last seen him at Celeste's funeral. "Mom? What are you doing here? I thought you were still in that village." "I am. But I needed to see you, Dominic. There's something you need to know, something Celeste discovered before she died." His expression immediately became guarded. "Not this again. Mom, if this is about Celeste's conspiracy theories about Vivian." "It's not a conspiracy theory. It's the truth, and you're in danger. Please, just come with me. Give me 2 hours. Look at the evidence. Then if you still think I'm crazy, I'll leave you alone. But you owe it to your sister's memory to at least look." Something in my voice must have convinced him because after a long moment, he nodded. 2 hours. But that's it. We took a taxi to the hotel where Inspector Moreau was waiting. I'd prepared Dominic as much as I could during the drive, explaining that Celeste had spent months researching Vivian, that there were some very serious concerns about her true identity and her past. Dominic had listened with increasing anger and skepticism, but he'd agreed to see the evidence. Inspector Moreau met us in a private conference room. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with gray hair and a calm, professional demeanor that immediately commanded respect. With him were Detective Chin, who'd flown in from the States, and Marcus Goldstein. "Mr. Hawthorne," Inspector Moreau said, shaking Dominic's hand. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be confusing and distressing. But I promise you, everything we are about to show you is documented, verified, and true." For the next hour, they walked Dominic through the evidence. The birth certificates proving Vivian's real age. The photographs showing her throughout the decades. The marriage records. The death certificates. The police reports. The witness statements. The financial records showing how she'd inherited millions from 2 dead husbands. I watched my son's face as the truth crashed over him in waves. Denial, confusion, anger, horror, disbelief, and finally, a terrible understanding. "This can't be real," he kept saying. "She's 34. She can't be 68. I've seen her driver's license, her passport." "Forgeries," Marcus explained gently. "Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. She's been doing this for decades. She knows how to create false identities, how to make herself appear younger, how to manipulate official documents." "But why? Why would she target me? I'm not that wealthy." "You're wealthy enough," Detective Chin said. "Your firm's shares alone are worth several million. Your house, your investments, your life insurance. And you're the right age, middle-aged, successful, recently divorced, somewhat isolated from family. You fit her victim profile perfectly." Dominic looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Celeste tried to tell me. She tried to warn me, and I wouldn't listen. I cut her off. I let Vivian convince me that my own sister was lying, was jealous, was trying to ruin my life." His voice broke. "Oh God, Celeste died thinking I didn't believe her, that I'd chosen Vivian over her." I took his hand. "She understood, sweetheart. She didn't blame you. That's why she left all this evidence for me, so we could protect you even after she was gone." "How long do I have?" Dominic asked, looking at Inspector Moreau. "If everything you're saying is true, if she follows her pattern, when would she try to kill me?" "Based on the timeline of her previous crimes, probably within the next 6 to 18 months. She's been with you for 3 years. That's typically when she moves to secure her final position and then eliminates her victim." Dominic stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "So what do we do? Do I confront her? Do I just break up with her? Do I have her arrested?" "That's why we're here," Inspector Moreau said. "We have a plan, but it requires your cooperation and your trust. And it may not give you the justice you want. Our primary goal is to protect your life and get Vivian to leave you alone. Prosecution for her past crimes is a longer-term objective that may or may not succeed." He outlined the plan. "We would bring Vivian here, to this room. We would present her with the evidence. We would make it clear that she was under investigation by multiple international agencies. We would offer her a deal: leave immediately, stay away from Dominic permanently, and submit to monitoring, or face immediate arrest and prosecution. And if she doesn't? Then we arrest her immediately. We have enough evidence to charge her with fraud at minimum. Murder will be harder to prove, but we can hold her while we build the case." Dominic looked at all of us, his face pale but determined. "Do it. Bring her here. I want to see her face when she realizes her game is over." The confrontation. Vivian arrived at the hotel an hour later, summoned by a text from Dominic saying he needed to see her urgently, that there was a problem with some of Celeste's estate matters and he needed her support. She walked into the conference room wearing an elegant dress and heels, her platinum blonde hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked exactly like a beautiful 34-year-old woman, and knowing she was actually 68 made my skin crawl. Her smile faltered when she saw all of us waiting: me, Dominic, Inspector Moreau, Detective Chin, Marcus Goldstein. Her eyes, which had been warm and concerned when she entered, became cold and calculating in an instant. "Dominic? What's going on?" Who are all these people? Sit down, Vivian, Dominic said, his voice hard. We need to talk. I don't understand. Sit down. She sat, her movements careful, controlled. Her eyes flicked from face to face, assessing the situation with visible intelligence. Inspector Moreau placed a folder on the table in front of her. Madame Beaumont. Or should I say Madame Caldwell? Or do you prefer your maiden name, Marchand? I watched the blood drain from her face. For just an instant, her careful mask slipped, and I saw fear in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult our intelligence with denials. Inspector Moreau opened the folder and began laying out photographs. Vivian at 30, at 40, at 50, at 60. Birth certificates. Marriage certificates. Death certificates. We know who you are. We know what you've done. We know about Laurent Beaumont and Richard Caldwell. We know you're 68 years old, not 34. We know you've been planning to kill Mr. Hawthorne and inherit his estate, just like you killed your previous husbands. Vivian's face had gone completely blank, emotionless. She looked at the evidence without touching it, then raised her eyes to Dominic. You can't possibly believe this ridiculous story. These people are clearly trying to extort money from you by making up elaborate lies. I've seen your real birth certificate, Dominic said, his voice shaking with anger. I've read the police reports about your husband's deaths. I've seen photographs of you from 30 years ago. It's not a lie, Vivian. Or whatever your real name is. She was silent for a long moment, her mind clearly racing through options. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was a cold, terrible smile that transformed her beautiful face into something monstrous. Well, she said softly. I suppose the game is up, isn't it? Your sister was smarter than I gave her credit for. I knew she'd been asking questions, digging into things that weren't her business. That's why I made sure Dominic cut her off. I thought I'd dealt with the problem. She looked at me with pure hatred. But apparently she passed the torch to dear old Mom before she died. The casual admission was chilling. No denial, no pretense. Just cold acknowledgement of her crimes. Did you kill them? Dominic asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laurent and Richard? Did you murder your husbands? Vivian shrugged elegantly. Murder is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as strategic life planning. They were old, Dominic. They'd lived their lives. All I did was accelerate the inevitable and ensure their assets went to someone who could actually appreciate them. They trusted you. They loved you. They were marks. Her voice was cold, matter of fact. Wealthy, lonely men looking for validation from a beautiful woman. It's almost too easy. A little attention, a little affection, some strategic vulnerability, and they'll give you everything. Access to their finances, their homes, their lives. Then it's just a matter of patience and timing. And me? Dominic's voice broke. Was I just another mark? For the first time, something like emotion flickered across her face. You were supposed to be. But you were more difficult than the others. More attached to your family, despite everything. More independent. It's why I had to work so hard to isolate you from your mother and sister. She looked at me again. You were the biggest obstacle. Mothers always are. They ask too many questions, they trust their instincts. I've learned over the years that you have to remove the mother from the equation as early as possible. Is that why you pushed so hard to keep Dominic away from me at Celeste's funeral? I asked, my voice steady despite my rage. Why you sent those strange warning texts when I came to France? Of course. I knew something was off when Celeste left you that mysterious plane ticket. I knew there had to be evidence somewhere, something she'd discovered. I tried to scare you off, tried to make you doubt yourself, tried to convince Dominic you were becoming senile and confused. She laughed bitterly. But you just kept digging, didn't you? Just like your daughter. Inspector Moreau cleared his throat. Madame Beaumont, you understand that you have just confessed to multiple murders in the presence of law enforcement officers? She looked at him calmly. You're recording this, I assume? Yes. Then I suppose I should stop talking and request a lawyer. You could do that, Detective Chin said. Or you could listen to the deal we're prepared to offer you. Vivian's eyes sharpened with interest. What deal? Marcus Goldstein leaned forward. We have enough evidence to charge you with fraud, identity theft, and potentially murder in multiple jurisdictions. The legal process would be lengthy, expensive, and very public. Your face would be on every news channel. Your past would be dissected in every courtroom. Or, Inspector Moreau continued, you could accept an alternative. You leave France immediately. You never contact Mr. Hawthorne again. You submit to monitoring by international authorities. And in exchange, we don't pursue prosecution at this time. You're letting me go? Vivian looked skeptical. Why? Because our primary objective is protecting Mr. Hawthorne's life, not revenge, Inspector Moreau said. Prosecution would take years and might not succeed. This way, you're neutralized immediately. Vivian was silent, clearly calculating odds and options. Finally, she nodded. What are the specific terms? They outlined it. She would leave France within 24 hours. She would sign documents relinquishing any claim to Dominic's assets. She would provide DNA samples and fingerprints for ongoing investigation. She would agree to periodic check-ins with authorities. And she would never, under any circumstances, contact Dominic or anyone in his family again. And if I refuse? Then we arrest you right now, Detective Chin said flatly. And you'll spend the rest of your life fighting extradition and murder charges in multiple countries. Vivian looked at Dominic one last time. I suppose this is goodbye, then. Were any of it real? Dominic asked. Anything you said, anything you did? Did you feel anything for me at all? She considered the question, then shook her head. No. It was all performance. You were a job, Dominic. A very well-paid job, but just a job nonetheless. She stood up. I'll take your deal. But I want it in writing, and I want my lawyer to review it before I sign anything. Agreed, Marcus said. We can have documents prepared within 2 hours. Vivian walked to the door, then paused and looked back at me. Your daughter was remarkable, Mrs. Hawthorne. Most people never see me coming, never suspect anything until it's far too late. But Celeste saw through me from the beginning, didn't she? I made a mistake underestimating her. And I made a mistake underestimating you. You made a mistake thinking you could hurt my family without consequences, I said coldly. My daughter may be gone, but her work lives on. And if you ever threaten anyone I love again, if you ever target another victim, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you pay for every crime you've ever committed. She smiled that terrible cold smile again. I believe you would. Then she was gone, escorted out by 2 plainclothes officers. Aftermath. Vivian signed the documents that evening. By the next morning, she had left France. Inspector Moreau's team confirmed she'd flown to Brazil, a country with no extradition treaty with France or the United States. She'll disappear, he told me when he called with the update. She has resources, skills, and decades of experience evading detection. We'll monitor her as best we can, but realistically, she's going to vanish into whatever identity she's prepared for this contingency. So she gets away with it, I said bitterly. She murders at least 2 people, probably more, and she just walks away free. For now. But Mrs. Hawthorne, you and your daughter have given us something invaluable, a comprehensive case file on a serial killer who has operated with impunity for decades. That information is now in the hands of international law enforcement. Vivian Beaumont's face, her methods, her patterns, all of it is now documented and shared across multiple agencies. She can never operate the same way again. Every move she makes will be watched. And if she tries to target another victim, we'll know. It wasn't the justice I wanted. But it was something. Dominic stayed in France for another week, helping me close up the house in Belmont-sur-Colline and sort through Celeste's research. We talked more in that week than we had in the past 5 years, really talked, about Celeste, about our family, about the ways we'd failed each other. I should have believed her, he said one evening as we sat in Celeste's house by the fireplace. When she tried to warn me about Vivian, should have at least listened, at least looked at her evidence before dismissing her. Vivian is a professional manipulator, I said gently. She's been perfecting her craft for decades. It's not your fault she fooled you. But I chose her over my own sister. I let Vivian convince me that Celeste was toxic, that I needed to cut her out of my life for my own well-being. And Celeste died thinking I'd rejected her, that I valued some woman I'd known for 3 years more than I valued the sister I'd grown up with. Celeste understood. That's why she did all this, she was trying to protect you, even after the way you treated her. She loved you, Dominic. She never stopped loving you. We cried together that night, grieving for Celeste, for the time we'd wasted, for the damage that had been done to our family. Before I left France, I did one final thing that Celeste had asked for in her notes. I visited the cemetery in Belmont-sur-Colline, the location marked with a red X on her hand-drawn map. There, in the old section where graves dated back centuries, I found what Celeste had discovered. A small gravestone, weathered and moss-covered, with a name that made my breath catch. Marguerite Marchand, née Winters, 1930 to 1956. Beloved wife and mother. Marchand. Vivian's maiden name. And Winters, that had been my mother's maiden name. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called Inspector Moreau. I need you to run a genealogy search. I think Vivian might be related to me. Distantly, but related. It took 3 days to confirm, but the genealogy research revealed a shocking truth. Vivian's grandmother and my grandmother had been sisters. We were third cousins, connected by blood through a French family line that had split generations ago when my grandmother immigrated to America. Celeste had discovered this connection in the church records in Belmont-sur-Colline. That's why she'd bought the house here, in the village where our shared ancestors had lived. She'd been tracing the family tree, trying to understand if Vivian had deliberately targeted Dominic knowing he was a distant relative, or if it had been a terrible coincidence. The answer, I suspected, was even more disturbing. Vivian hadn't known about the family connection when she'd first targeted Dominic. But she'd discovered it at some point, probably when Celeste started asking questions and digging into family history. And instead of backing away, she'd doubled down, worked harder to isolate Dominic, pushed more aggressively to cut him off from his sister. Because Celeste knowing about the family connection meant Celeste might dig deeper into Vivian's past. Might find the thread that would unravel everything. She targeted my son, I said to Inspector Moreau on the phone, my voice shaking with rage. She found out we were related, that Dominic was family, and she still planned to kill him. What kind of monster does that? The kind who sees people only as resources, he replied grimly. The kind who has no capacity for emotional connection or empathy. Mrs. Hawthorne, I've been doing this work for 20 years, and I can tell you, true psychopaths like Vivian Beaumont are rare, but they're also the most dangerous predators in our society. They look human, they mimic human emotions perfectly, but inside they're completely hollow. Family means nothing to them. Love means nothing. Only power and control and acquisition matter. I looked at the gravestone of Marguerite Marchand, our shared ancestor, and wondered if she would be horrified or heartbroken to know what one of her descendants had become. 6 months later. I'm back home now, living in my small apartment, but everything has changed. Dominic and I talk at least twice a week. He's in therapy, working through the trauma of discovering that someone he loved and trusted had been planning to murder him. He's rebuilding his life, reconnecting with friends he'd lost touch with during his years with Vivian, rediscovering who he is without her manipulation. He sold the house he'd shared with Vivian and bought a modest condo downtown. He's dating again, slowly and carefully, learning to trust his instincts, learning to recognize red flags he'd missed before. I keep thinking about all the warning signs I ignored, he told me last week during one of our phone calls. The way she isolated me from you and Celeste. The way she never wanted me to meet her family or friends. The way she controlled what we talked about, what we did, who we saw. It was all there, but I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it. You see it now, I said. That's what matters. I just wish Celeste was here. I wish I could apologize to her, tell her she was right, tell her I'm sorry for not believing her. She knows, sweetheart. Wherever she is, she knows. Inspector Moreau calls me monthly with updates. Vivian's trail went cold in Brazil after a few weeks. She's vanished completely, likely operating under yet another false identity in yet another country. But her profile has been distributed to Interpol, to fraud divisions in every major country, to investigators who specialize in financial crimes and elder abuse. She can't work the same way anymore, Inspector Moreau told me last month. Too many people know her face, her methods, her patterns. If she tries to target another wealthy victim, especially in Europe or North America, she'll be flagged immediately. But she's still out there. Still free. For now. But people like Vivian eventually make mistakes. They get arrogant, they take risks, they believe they're too smart to be caught. And when she makes that mistake, we'll be ready. I hope he's right. I hope that someday, Vivian will face real justice for her crimes. But I've learned that justice isn't always swift, isn't always clean, isn't always satisfying. Sometimes you have to settle for protecting the people you love and making sure the truth doesn't die in darkness. Celeste's legacy. I kept the house in Belmont-sur-Colline. At first, I wasn't sure why. It seemed morbid to keep this place where my daughter had documented such darkness, where she'd spent her final months uncovering terrible truths. But then I realized what Celeste had really created here. Not just a case file or an investigation, but a sanctuary for truth. A place where secrets couldn't hide, where lies were exposed, where justice began even if it didn't end the way we wanted. I've turned it into something Celeste would have approved of. Working with Inspector Moreau and Detective Chin, I've established it as a resource center for victims of romance fraud and financial abuse. We maintain files on known predators, share information with law enforcement, provide support for families dealing with the aftermath of discovering their loved ones have been targeted. Sophie Rousseau from the cafe helps me manage it when I'm back home. We've created a small foundation in Celeste's name, the Celeste Hawthorne Foundation for Truth and Justice. It's not much, but it's something. A way to make sure my daughter's work continues, that her last act of love and protection ripples outward to help others. Dominic donated a significant amount of money to the foundation. Celeste saved my life, he said when he wrote the check. The least I can do is make sure her work helps save others. Last month, we got our first success story. A woman in London reached out after reading about the foundation online. Her elderly father had recently become involved with a much younger woman who seemed too good to be true. The daughter had found our website, had seen the warning signs we documented, had recognized the same patterns Vivian had used. We helped her conduct a background check that revealed her father's new girlfriend was actually a con artist with multiple aliases and a history of targeting wealthy elderly men. The woman was arrested before she could drain his accounts or worse. "You saved my father's life," the daughter wrote to me. "Just like your daughter saved your son's life. Thank you for making sure the truth didn't die with her." I cried when I read that letter. Happy tears, sad tears, proud tears all mixed together. Final reflections. It's been 10 months since Celeste died. 10 months since she left me that plane ticket and sent me on a journey I never expected. 10 months since I discovered that my daughter spent her final days trying to save her brother from a serial killer. I think about her every day. I see her in Dominic's face when he smiles, that same bright intelligence, that same stubborn determination to do what's right even when it's hard. I see her in the work of the foundation, in every victim we help, in every predator we expose. Sometimes I'm angry that she had to carry this burden alone, that she spent her dying days investigating a murderer instead of just resting and accepting comfort. But then I remember what she wrote in her final letter: "You taught me that the truth matters. That integrity matters. That we don't let wrong things continue just because confronting them is uncomfortable." I did teach her that. I taught both my children to stand up for what's right, to protect people who can't protect themselves, to never let injustice go unchallenged just because it's easier to look away. Celeste took those lessons to heart in a way I never imagined. And in doing so, she not only saved her brother's life, she taught me something too. She taught me that even when you're dying, even when you're in pain, even when the world seems dark and hopeless, you can still make a difference. You can still fight for truth. You can still protect the people you love. That's her real legacy. Not the house in France, not the foundation, not even the evidence that helped protect Dominic. Her real legacy is the reminder that love means action, that family means protection, that truth matters even when, especially when, it costs us something to pursue it. Epilogue, the letter I found. 2 weeks ago, I was going through some of Celeste's belongings that had been in storage, boxes of papers and books that I hadn't had the strength to sort through until now. At the bottom of one box, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. It wasn't in the house in France, wasn't part of her organized case files. This was something else. Something private. My hands shook as I opened it. Dearest Mom. If you're reading this, then you made the journey. You found the truth. You saved Dominic. You did what I couldn't do because I ran out of time. I'm so proud of you. I always have been, even when I didn't say it enough. You raised me alone after Dad died. You worked 2 jobs to put me and Dom through school. You sacrificed your own happiness, your own chances at love, your own dreams to make sure we had opportunities you never had. And what did we give you in return? Dom became so focused on money and success that he forgot about family. And I became so focused on my career and my adventures that I didn't spend enough time with you, didn't call enough, didn't visit enough. We took you for granted. I took you for granted. But here's what I realized in these last months, as the cancer ate away at my body and I spent every waking hour trying to save my brother from a woman who wanted to kill him. You never stopped being our mother. You never stopped loving us unconditionally. You never stopped being willing to sacrifice for us. That's why I knew I could leave this burden for you. Not because it was fair, it's not fair, and I'm sorry for that. But because I knew that if anyone could see this through, could find the truth and protect Dom and do the hard, scary, exhausting work of confronting evil, it would be you. You've always been the strongest person I know. The bravest. The most determined. I hope that someday, Dom realizes what you did for him. I hope he understands that you took a journey to a foreign country, spent weeks investigating a serial killer, coordinated with international law enforcement, and confronted a murderer, all to save his life. But even if he doesn't fully understand, even if he can never really appreciate the magnitude of what you've done, I want you to know that I see you. I've always seen you. You're my hero, Mom. You always have been. Thank you for everything you've given me, life, love, strength, integrity, courage. Thank you for showing me what it means to be a good person, to stand up for what's right, to protect the people you love no matter what it costs. And thank you for finishing what I started. Thank you for saving my brother, even though he didn't deserve it, even though he'd treated both of us so badly. You saved him because that's who you are, someone who loves unconditionally, who protects family, who does the right thing even when it's hard. I hope you can forgive me for leaving you with this responsibility. I hope you can forgive me for not being strong enough to finish it myself. And I hope you know that even though I'm gone, I'm still with you. In the house in France, in the evidence we gathered together across time and distance, in every life we saved through the truth we've exposed. I love you, Mom. I've always loved you. And I always will. Thank you for being my mother. Thank you for being my hero. Forever yours, Celeste. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by boxes of my daughter's belongings, and cried until I had no tears left. Then I carefully folded the letter, put it back in its envelope, and placed it in the fireproof safe where I keep my most precious possessions. Celeste's last words to me. Her final gift. The present day. Now, when people ask me about my daughter, I don't just tell them about her death. I tell them about her life. About her brilliance, her courage, her determination to expose injustice even as she was dying. I tell them about the journey she sent me on, about the truth she uncovered, about the lives we saved together across the barrier of death itself. And I tell them about the foundation that bears her name, about the work we do to protect vulnerable people from predators like Vivian Beaumont. Your daughter must have been an extraordinary woman, people often say. She was, I always reply. But more than that, she was my daughter. And being her mother, even through heartbreak, even through loss, even through the darkness of what we discovered, has been the greatest honor of my life. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the plane ticket she left me. I framed it and hung it on my wall, a simple piece of paper that changed everything. My daughter died and left me only a plane ticket to rural France. But when I got there, I found so much more than I ever expected. I found the truth about a serial killer who'd evaded justice for decades. I found the strength to confront evil and protect my son. I found a way to honor my daughter's memory and continue her work. And most importantly, I found proof that love transcends death, that family means fighting for each other no matter the cost, and that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to make a difference. Celeste is gone. But her truth lives on. And as long as I'm alive, as long as the foundation continues, as long as we keep exposing predators and protecting victims, my daughter's final act of love will continue to ripple outward, saving lives, exposing lies, and proving that one person's courage can change the world. That's the real story. Not the plane ticket, not the house in France, not even the confrontation with a serial killer. The real story is about a daughter who loved her family enough to spend her dying days protecting them. And a mother who loved her daughter enough to finish the work she started.